Let's be honest, there isn't a lot that feels as magical as running around in a big tulle skirt. Luckily, it is not too difficult to make them if you know how. So, today I'll show you my 3 favorite ways to sew a tulle skirt, each giving different looks and silhouettes. Before we start, there are a few things we need to know and prepare, which will be useful for all 3 of the skirts. The fabric I'm using is a bridal tulle that is 3 meters wide, which is important because otherwise some pattern pieces wouldn't fit onto it. And even though there is nothing wrong with piecing parts together, it looks a bit weird on tulle, I think. The main tulle I'm using is a softer one with a significant smaller netting than usually found in stiffer tulle. Before starting on any kind of tulle skirt, I always iron a test piece of it to figure out the perfect settings. Later I will iron all the seams and folds, so it is important to know how hot I have to make the iron so that it flattens the fabric without destroying it. Another thing is that you will need a lot of thread. Not only because you have to sew all panels together, but mostly because making tulle skirts involves a lot of gathering, which needs a lot of thread. And something that is especially annoying is running out of thread when you are in the middle of a gathering seam. So having enough bobbins prepared and checking regularly how much thread is left saves you a lot of stress in the process. The only measurements we will need for all the skirts are the waist measurement as well as the length the skirt should have later. The length can of course vary, which is something you have to take into consideration. With all of that said and prepared, let's start with the first skirt. Skirt number 1 is the easiest to sew and also to plan out. It simply contains a few layers of various wide circle skirts. Using the waist measurement, I like to make a negative pattern. This is simply made drawing a half circle onto a sturdy paper with the radius matching the circumference of the waist. After subtracting 1 centimeter of the radius for the seam allowance, the pattern is ready. With this skirt I do this with the waist measurement and half of the waist to have some variety in the layers. I lay out the tulle and start to measure a layer made from a half circle with the full waist measurement. To cut a precise pattern piece this large, I usually secure the negative pattern in its place and then work my way around with my measuring tape, marking the right length in the same distance from each other. One thing I have to remember is to lay the pattern piece a bit away from the end of the tulle, so that I have a small seam allowance to sew the layers together later. I usually mark the length with pins because they are more visible than pencil markings, for example. After marking the length all around, I can cut out the layer, making sure I cut it in a curve to match the right length in between the markings as well. After cutting out the layer, I either put it aside or use it as a template if I need the same layer again. If that's the case, I place it on top of the tulle and spread it out carefully so that it doesn't have any wrinkles. For this kind of tulle skirt, I'm usually cutting 4 different layers, but each layer 2 times, so the final skirt contains 8 tulle layers. I'm starting with a half circle as the base and will make the layers bigger so that the last layers are made from 2 full circles sewn together each. The nice thing about the skirt is that you can add as many layers you want, or could leave a few layers away depending on how light you want the skirt to be. After cutting out all the layers, I have to first close each. Depending on the amount of circles, I either have to close whole seams or just cut in a bit at the back. With every layer I leave an opening of around 25 centimeters in the center back, so that the skirt can be put on in the end. When closing a seam, I'll always iron it flat, cut away as much as possible of the seam allowance, and then iron the seam allowance to one side. This makes the seam as invisible as possible later. After preparing every layer, I sew everything together. Since the last few layers have a wider circumference at the top than the waist, I have to gather them before attaching them to the rest. I usually just use a wider stitch with my sewing machine, sewing one seam at the top, but if you are scared of ripping the thread, I'd recommend to sew 2 gathering seams next to each other. Then I put the layer over the skirt, arranged the center front, center back and the sides to match up, and then pulled the gathering thread slowly until the width matches up. After sewing all layers together, the skirt is already finished. I usually use around 20 meters of fabric depending on how long I want the skirt to be. The next Tulle skirt is actually even more simple to make, but needs a bit more thinking for me. In contrast to the first skirt, which is full at the top as well as on the bottom, this skirt is only full at the hem. I love this kind of skirt because it has no bulk at the waist and gives different possibilities for dresses, but it also makes a color gradient possible because the top is more see-through than the rest. The way this skirt is made is to divide the waist measurements in small parts and then create negative patterns from every part. With all of these pattern pieces, I will cut out a half circle later. Cutting out all the layers works exactly like on the first skirt. I lay out the tulle, put the pattern pieces on top with the right distance to the edge, and then mark the length the circle needs. Usually I like my skirts to get a bit longer in the back, which means every half circle is going to be different. This means it is important to have everything marked clearly. In general, making tulle skirts, the only really difficult thing is to deal with so much fabric and not get overwhelmed. So having every layer labeled makes this a lot easier. For this skirt in particular, it is not only important to mark the layers, but also which edges will be sewn together, since every seam has a different length. So I like to mark it with letters for every seam. With every part cut out and marked properly, the only thing to do now is to sew everything together. In contrast to the wide gathering stitch, I usually prefer to use a very small stitch to sew 2 layers together to make sure they are really secured. After sewing every part together, keeping in mind to leave the center back open for 25 centimeters again, the tulle skirt is almost ready. You can leave it like this, of course, but I prefer to put a simple circle layer on the inside to even out the gradient a bit, but also to make it a bit more sturdy. This kind of skirt looks especially nice with the different colored lining skirt underneath to show the gradient of it. The last skirt is the most difficult one as well as the biggest. Here we not only need different tulles, but also not only circle pattern pieces. Compared to the first skirt, it is less of an A-line and makes a lot more volume possible. This skirt is made using a half circle made from a sturdier tulle, which will have different layers of tulle sewn onto it. The distance of those layers varies with every skirt depending on the length and also the silhouette I want to achieve, but this is about the base I always use and then change up. So, starting with the base, I use a negative pattern of the waist measurement again, and cut out a half circle from the sturdier tulle 2 times. These layers will then be sewn together and marked at each quarter. With the base ready, I can then start to prepare all the layers. Starting from the bottom, I usually just use long straps of fabric gathered and sewn to the base. For this skirt, it will be the first 5 layers. So I cut straps from the fabric, for each layer 4, sew them together into a continuous strip and gather the top. Sometimes I like to cut everything before sewing, sometimes I prefer to finish each layer, but in any case I have to mark everything properly again. With the layer finished, I then pin each quarter at the right height onto the base layer, and then from then always divide it in half and pin down the middles, so I have a lot of small parts with the same amount of fabric. After that, I then pull the gathering thread, pin everything secure and then sew the layer onto the base. I'll continue this up the base layer until I start to use circles. These will be cut out the same way as for the other skirts, adjusted to the length of each layer, of course. Sewing the circular layers to the base works exactly like the straight layers before. I'll pin everything at the right height in equal distances, pull the gathering thread and then sew everything together. Here I also vary the amount of circles I use, so I have a different hem on each layer. This ensures that in the end the layers lay on top of each other and won't fall together so much. Before adding the final top layers, I like to close the center back of the base. I start with turning it inside out and close the back seam of the base layer up to 25 cm from the top. Now you can easily pull up every sewn layer and then there is enough room to close the next one. After that, I like to put the skirt on a mannequin to add the next layers to it. These are again different variations of circular pieces sewn together. Usually they have to be gathered at the top as well, so again I'll pin them to the base and then pull the gathering thread until it matches up. Each layer gets sewn to the base and then the next layer can be attached. The only thing that needs to be remembered here is again to leave the center back open on the top so that the skirt will be accessible. You can add as many layers as you want to the skirt and play with the density to create whichever shape you like. To finish off a tulle skirt, I usually cut a half circle with the same negative pattern of the waist from a lining fabric. This will get an invisible zipper sewn in, topped with hooks and eyes on a waistband to give the skirt enough hold. The zipper doesn't need to be sewn into the tulle and only added to the lining. This way the fluffy tulle will cover it in the center back and you won't see it from the outside. Cutting all the tulle layers in circles makes it possible for them to stretch out over time a bit, so I like to even out the hem of the skirt as the last step. For this, I just gently cut away everything that is longer than the rest, but making sure not to cut any strange shapes and keep the nice curve. Since the tulle doesn't fray, the hem doesn't need any more finishing. After evening out the hem, the final tulle skirt is ready. It has a very nice movement due to all of the different layers and I really like the look of it. So, these are all 3 types of tulle skirts I use. Whenever I sew a tulle skirt, I decide between these 3, always tweaking them a bit further. Feel free to try them out yourself, you can always come back and screenshot my notes if you want. And if you have any more questions, leave them in the comments and I'm happy to answer them. I hope you liked this a bit more tutorial-like video. As always, let me know what you think and until next time.